SMU debate professor Ben Voth. Thank you so much. We
Oh,
appreciate it.
you're welcome. Glad to be here, Jack.
So, this debate is going to have a totally different feel, obviously, than the first presidential debate. What sticks out to you?
Well, obviously, the big change is that we don't have Biden in the lead for the Democrats. We've got Kamala Harris, and she's got a very dynamic character. She has a younger character. That's obviously what the DNC was looking for. Her prosecutor role, I think, is going to really stand out and be something that's interesting for people to watch. We've seen it before in the 2020 primaries, but I think all eyes are kind of on Kamala Harris. I mean, Donald Trump is a pretty well-known commodity, but also an exciting one where people don't know what he's going to say, and it's probably going to be rambunctious, and so people will be looking for that. So I think this is a very interesting and different debate. It's almost unprecedented that we've ever had like a big candidate switch like we've had here in the last 3 months. So that makes this debate really interesting.
And so there again is a debate over the microphones and whether they are going to be muted when the other candidate is talking, for the other candidate. So I'm just wondering, there's been a whole issue about this. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I think that is very fascinating, and I think it actually is very significant. Of course, these arrangements were made by the networks with the DNC and the RNC way back when Biden was, of course, the original candidate. I think at the time the DNC thought that the muting of mics would help Biden control the aggressive character of Trump. Well, now with the Harris campaign, there is a rhetorical move that she often makes in debates where she says, "I'm speaking now." And what she's saying is the other person is inappropriately interrupting her and kind of scoring some ethos points. And so that was going to be blocked by the muting of the mics, just automated cutoffs. And so she made that move in the last election in 2020 against Mike Pence, and it worked with some effect. And so I think that her campaign, kind of her new campaign, was hoping to capitalize on that same move. Now, in the negotiation, that campaign backed off, and so we're still with that rule about muting the mics, which probably does control the risk of Trump interrupting and kind of creating this bad male-female dynamic that Kamala Harris has capitalized on in previous campaigns.
So this will help Trump in a sense.
It actually, I think, will, because, and I think it will cause the debate to generally go better. I've long said that when their time of speaking is over, their mic should go off so that there is a equal amount of time given to each candidate. But I do think it will help Trump, not really to be heard when he kind of maybe says something more beyond the time limit. It'll be less of an interruption for Kamala Harris, where she would try to capitalize and say, "Hey, you're stepping on my time." I think we'll still see that, but it will be literally muted by the muted mics to a large extent.
So what does each candidate need to do to win this?
That's a really great question. And, there are several levels of analysis to kind of figure this out. One of them is the expectations game, like who is expected to be a better debater. They're actually both pretty good in terms of their track record. I personally had Harris ranked very high in the 2020 Democratic primaries and things like that. I thought she really was pretty good. Trump didn't do much debating in the current cycle of 2024, but obviously kind of disposed of Biden in the most recent debate in June 27. So there's an expectations game where their campaigns are trying to say like, hey, my guy's not very good, or my lady's not very good at debating. And so they're going to exceed expectations. So there's going to be that part of it. I think the second part that may be more important is rallying the base. I think that both sides are kind of competing for a very narrow set of voters that haven't decided. And so it's now about turnout. And so not making a mistake that demobilizes their side is sort of critical. And there's a lot of risk to that because they're both, in some sense, we can see it that they're trying to move to the middle and a little bit contradicting maybe some of their base arguments on the left and right reciprocally. And so there's a risk of exposure like, hey, that's not the position you took 6 months ago on this issue. And so you're demobilizing your base. But at the same time, they're trying to dip into that undecided independent vote. And so that's the hard substantive part of the judgment is like, are they overreaching into the middle, contradicting base arguments that they made 6 months ago? And I think that's the interesting thing to try to judge. I will say I think the Harris campaign is facing kind of a narrowing platform right now, where initially 3 months ago, just the surge of not having Biden on the ticket really helped. But now there's really a consideration of like, okay, what are your positions versus Biden's positions? What are your positions versus your previous positions, like in 2020 or something like that? Whereas I think Trump kind of continues to kind of be himself, but he is also moving some into the center, like on abortion and things like that. And so those are the risks they're going to try to navigate as they do the debate on Tuesday night, I think.
Regarding policy, doesn't former President Trump have to really attack Vice President Harris because of her differing positions from when she ran in 2020 and what she says now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the recent CNN interview that she did do establishes kind of a benchmark. And there is a problem there where in the interview it does seem like she's staking out newer, more conservative positions like enforcing the border or not being opposed to fracking. But at the same time in that interview saying, my values haven't changed. Well, Trump would need to kind of isolate like, hey, you were pretty firm on this fracking position. You were pretty firm on your anti-wall position. So what does it mean now for you to say, hey, I'm going a different way? Are you really committed to that? And so, yeah, he will need to try to science out like the details of past positions, current positions. And that does take a little more time in these short snippets of like, 2 minutes of trying to explain to an audience like, hey, there's a shift in this person's position. I know my debaters, they deal with that too. Like, hey, my opponent is shifting their position. And that's something you want to do as a strategy in a debate.
So Kamala Harris has to really go after Trump. You're expecting this, right? As far as all of his indictments, January 6th, how is he going to defend himself on that?
Yeah, so she is going to play out her prosecutor role in terms of those criminal issues. I think he will say what he said before, that these are, political prosecutions, and kind of cast himself as the victim of lawfare and this kind of thing. And so, that may or may not be persuasive. I think that has worked somewhat for him, but I don't think that's probably going to change. I don't think he's going to have new information about that. So I think that's probably what Trump will do to respond to that.
Anything that each of them needs to avoid?
Well, they want to avoid really significant gaffes. I mean, the June 27th debate is definitely looming in everybody's eyes. Like if you make some sort of serious mistake that can be replayed over and over again, where you really misstate some sort of really obvious thing, that's going to hurt. And so they just want to not make a major error. And that also sort of encourages don't take big risks. Don't say something really wild that is probably going to backlash or something like that. So they're going to try to play it safe to some degree while still rallying their base to their sides.
We talked a little bit before about the sliver of undecideds, but when you look at how close the race is in these 7 battleground states, everything really within 1.5 percentage points, isn't this debate could be crucial in making people's minds up who are undecided, right?
Yeah, I do think in terms of presidential election history, we're looking at a very unique point in time where this debate could be decisive, because a small 1 or 2% move by the electorate would decide the election. And so they are going to have to, and they will, we already can see it, that they're going to reach into that center where they think the undecideds are. And so for Trump, he's probably going to try to soften on abortion. And for her, she may try to soften on her border positions and try to get into that middle and try to pull that 1 or 2% of people who maybe haven't still made up their minds to their side. And that is a really critical thing. This is a very decisive moment in history, and this could be one of the most important debates in presidential election history in terms of the ramifications of it.
And then to your point about a gaffe maybe demobilizing people, saying, ooh, maybe I won't vote.
Right, there's definitely a risk of being turned off, and that could be the bigger risk, because they both galvanize, probably over 90%, 95% of their own base. But if 3% of their base were to be demobilized by a bad performance in the debate, that would be far more devastating than the 1 or 2% they might hope to gain inside that independent, undecided pocket that is probably shrinking every day. So they do have to be careful to keep what they have in this really big election of 2024.
SMU debate professor Ben Voth, thank you so much as always. We appreciate the insight.
Oh, loved it. Thanks for coming on campus.